Welcome. This video is going to break down Eden Rock by Charles Causley, which is included in the Love and Relationships collection for AQA GCSE English Lit, amongst other collections. I'm here to show you the crucial information that you need for the poem, and then I'm going to show you what you can do with this information to make sure it stays in the long-term memory. If you're studying this poem for GCSE, you'll find it a useful and accessible poem for comparison, so it's definitely worth learning this one in some detail. This is the short version of this. If you want the full version, check out my video on When We Two Parted or Sonnet 29. The headings you see here are organised so you can easily compare aspects of poetry and hit all of the criteria you need to in the exam. This allows you to learn and revise the way the poets present their feelings in a particular poem to compare it with the presentation of feelings in another poem. The same for the ways the poets use the endings to show their ideas and all the rest. It doesn't make sense to learn it any other way. You can also use the headings to create a mind map, and if you do, you can use a template like this. There's more details on how to learn the poem at the end of the video, including information about flashcards and what you have to put on them if you really want to secure that information. The poem is a lyric poem exploring the passing of parents. We use the word elegy to describe a poem that reflects on the death of people, so you can also use that term. The poet describes a scene from his past when his parents were young, and he uses the present tense to show how the imagined scene is happening right now in his experience. It's described in so much detail that you can imagine him looking at a photograph and describing the moment. In this scene, his parents are in their perfect form, and this links to the title Eden Rock. Eden was the world in its perfect, unblemished state as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible. I don't tend to include too much biographical information in these videos, because the exam board don't really want you to go away and learn a bunch of biographical information on writers and then regurgitate it in the exams. But Causley's on record as saying that Eden Rock is a made-up place, not real. So that allows us to take on board the unreality of the perfect state that his parents and dog seem to be in. He was also Cornish, so the picture I used at the start of this video and in the thumbnail is from Padstow Ferry, which goes over to a place that just happens to be called Rock, and in my head, the scene takes place somewhere like that. The tone is created with a comfortable, warm scene, and the poem is reassuring about the afterlife. And the overall meaning of the poem is that it's okay to have lost someone. For Causley, they're in a better place. I'm assuming that you've read the poem, so let's jump straight into analysing it. The poem begins and ends with ambiguity. Ambiguity is when the meaning is not really obvious, when more than one interpretation may make sense, or when the meaning is hard to pin down. The poem starts with the line, "They're waiting for me, somewhere beyond Eden Rock." At this point, the reader doesn't know who they are, and we'll see in a moment that the ambiguity of the ending revolves around the pronoun it, whereas here it's the pronoun they that's leading to ambiguity. That initial ambiguity is resolved slowly from the second line, revealing first the father, the second stanza reveals the mother. The vagueness persists throughout the poem. He gives it an airy, dreamlike quality with the word somewhere. Although the image itself is detailed, there remains a lot of undefined nature to it, and this could reflect the poet's anxiety about his parents and whether they're reunited in the afterlife or what the afterlife is actually like. Like Mother Any Distance, this poem's ending is particularly interesting and worth exploring. Like that poem, it has an ambiguous ending, and you'll see that the last line is separated out from the rest of the stanza. I'll touch on this again in the next section, but for now, let's just consider what he means when he says that final line. I had not thought it would be like this. The line is monosyllabic. Every word is a single syllable. It's expressed in plain, simple, short words, and ironically, it still results in complexity and ambiguity. The ambiguity arises from the pronoun it, and the reader must think about what it is, because Causley deliberately doesn't reveal it. The interpretation then is up to you, so you could decide that it's about the afterlife itself, as Causley is reflecting on the whole scene he's just painted, or it could be death itself. As the preceding line says, crossing is not as hard as you might think, suggesting that the parents are telling him not to worry. It wasn't painful. It was like crossing a stream. Whatever you decide, and We'll take more of the stream when we discuss imagery. It's worth exploring both possibilities here, as well as whatever your own thoughts might be, as examiners will reward alternative interpretations. Form is about the aspects of writing that are specific to the way poetry works, like the type of poem, the rhyme, and the rhythm. Structure in poetry is the way the poet organises the elements of the poem, the order, as well as overlapping with form when considering stanza organisation and rhyme. When we've discussed the beginning and end of the poem, we've already established some structural elements. What I do here is explore only the relevant aspects of form and structure, and anything you write about those aspects in an exam will probably have to be tied to analysis. So that's what I do here. When we look at Eden Rock, what becomes immediately apparent is that Causley uses a quatrain structure for most of the poem, but the line, all on its own at the end, is used symbolically. It's isolated, separated, just as he is isolated and separated from his parents. You can express this as a changing stanza structure with the quatrain, from the quatrain into a 3-line stanza and a 1-line stanza. That's a tercet and a monostitch if you like technical words. But if I'm being honest, I prefer the non-technical explanation. Think of the stanza structure as a quatrain with an extra gap, extra symbolic distance between parents and child. You can think of the quatrain as a stanza's choice that represents the whole family, including the dog, hence 3+1. Another aspect of the form that is interesting is the use of half rhyme. Full rhyme is when the final consonant sound and the preceding vowel sound match. Half rhyme is when the final consonant matches but the preceding vowel sound is different. Causley uses full rhyme just twice in the poem, the first time rhyming blue and screw, perhaps emphasising the specificity of the image of the picnic, and also at the end, where it bridges the gap created by that extra space in the final quatrain. Half rhyme, though, is much more prevalent. From the opening stanza, we see rock and jack, suit and feet. Each time, the final consonant matches, but the preceding vowel sound is different. The regularity of the half rhyme, sticking to an A-B rhyme structure, adds to the overall effect, which is to create a sense of things appearing together, sorted, and as they should be, but there's something not quite right, a little uncanny or unsettling, almost the rhyme version of the first line, somewhere beyond. That otherworldly effect ties into the fact that the parents are really in the afterlife, and the situation he's describing is not actually real. Let's briefly talk about enjambment. Some people spell it enjambment with an extra E, because the word is a loan word from French. I think we've had it long enough to drop the extra E and drop the French pronunciation of enjambment. But if you want to do the whole French thing, you carry on. Anyway, enjambment is when the line carries on without pause or punctuation into the next line. If this is within a stanza, we normally say that it reflects normal speech, makes it flow, speeds the pace up. That's a useful thing to say about an unseen poem that uses enjambment. When you see enjambment, most obviously in this poem, it crosses the stanzas. The end of stanza 4, it says leisurely. It does contain a comma, but it carries straight on into the start of stanza 5, where it continues, "They beckon to me from the other bank." Enjambment emphasises the metaphorical distance, and that emphasises the tone of the poem by highlighting the word leisurely. This is a safe place, there's no urgency, but there is a gap, a divide, and a distance. This is the bit where we talk about the imagery that you'd kick yourself if you missed. And for Eden Rock, that is religious imagery. We see images of the Holy Trinity, the Father, God, Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. In Christian teaching, the Trinity is actually one, 3 parts that make up the idea of God. Causley uses various images to convey the sense that they're being looked after by God and linking this through the Holy Trinity. For instance, he describes the same 3 plates, which is obviously a worldly, domestic, mundane image from the picnic, but it also operates as an allusion, a nod to the Trinity. The plates also have connotations of halos. If that isn't strong enough for you, you can see how Causley describes how the sky whitens as if lit by 3 suns. The word whitens shows a purifying of their world, and the 3 suns is showing that God is shining on them in Eden. I said before that Eden was the world in its perfect, unblemished state as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible, and in this sense it's a paradise, a heaven. In true Christian teaching, Eden and heaven are separate places, Eden being on earth, heaven being beyond the earthly experience, but we don't need to worry too much on that because Causley's writing what he imagines, what gives him comfort, and this is how he sees it. There are other religious images in the poem, so we can also see her hair, the colour of wheat, takes on the light. In this image, Mum is described with God shining down on her, illuminating her, and this creates an angelic image. Distance. Some people interpret the poem as a premonition of the moment of death, with Causley seeing his parents for the first time since their deaths. This could also help to explain the lines which say, "Leisurely they beckon to me from the other bank." In this case, the enjambment emphasises that metaphorical distance, as we've already established. There's a physical space on the page, and the physical space between the line is echoed in the final stanza, as we talked about earlier. The stream itself is a Stygian image, which is a fancy way of saying it relates to the river Styx of Greek mythology, which must be crossed to get to the afterlife. The parents beckon, which means they're waving their arms, and it usually means to follow or come closer. Crossing is not as hard as you might think. It's reassuring, but without the idea that the moment is a premonition, it looks like the parents are waiting for him to die, which would be extraordinary. For the time being, the premonition is a comfort, reassuring the poet that his parents are distant but happy, at peace, and there for when the moment comes. The idea behind this section is to give you an easily identifiable point that you can use to explore the presentation of feelings and use as a starting point to compare the feelings, or the ways the feelings are presented, in other poems. Perhaps the most striking feeling we get from the poem originates in the description of his parents and the dog. They're frozen in their ideal form. The father is in the same suit, but we don't know what it's the same as. The dog is still 2 years old, and both of these suggest an image, perhaps a photograph that Causley cherishes. That notion is developed with a specificity, picking out the really detailed points with precision. That same suit is genuine Irish tweed, and Mum's dress is a sprigged dress. Now, as an English teacher, I must confess I am partial to a bit of genuine tweed, but I had to look up what a sprigged dress was when I first read the poem. As you probably know, it's as simple as it sounds. It's a dress with a pattern of small flowers or leaves. There's tea from a thermos and milk straight from an old HP sauce bottle, presumably well washed before use. These details, including brands like Thermos and HP Sauce, create a sense of reality, of the mundane world, not a convoluted and arty interpretation, and not your typical, certainly not my typical idea of paradise. The details tell us that Causley's paradise is perhaps a reality he's already encountered and thinks about a lot, and it's a tender, fond and loving place. Interestingly, this contrasts with some of the vagueness of the poem, the somewhere from the beginning, the ambiguity of it at the end. Paradise, then, might be a dreamy version of the best bits of our lives. Next steps. The best thing to do to get a picture of the whole poem is to create a mind map of it. Use the headings I've provided here, and you'll have a 6-pronged mind map, which is crucial to know in advance of starting your mind map, as it's going to make spacing it out a whole bunch easier. I will always use the same headings, so you can keep making mind maps of the poems, keep the format the same, which is going to make comparing them a lot easier too. Please check out my video on creating mind maps if you're unsure how to make them. I've mocked up a template here though if you want to use it. If you're trying to learn quotations, and I really would for this poem, the most effective way is to get the individual bits of information on flashcards. I'm going to put the information on screen in a moment for what goes on each flashcard, and remember, they are two-sided, so that's why there are 2 columns. The cards need to be identified with the name of the poem, so you need to identify them in some way. I've put that in initials in the top corner. If you don't do that, you get confused when you add to the cards with quotations from other poems. The meaning side can be put in your own words if you wish, but don't use any of the same words as the quotation or term, or it will be too easy. I've worded the cards as having a desirable difficulty, a tiny bit of difficulty, so that when you turn them over, you can be precise about what you're learning. And if you don't get it 100%, remember you can't half know something. Making the flashcards is step one to learning them. So I'll link my video guide to making and using flashcards in the description. That gives you a guide to the lightness system, which concentrates your learning on the ones you don't know. So it's a really effective way of learning information quickly. I've used it to learn more stuff than I ever thought I could learn. So give it a go and you'll surprise yourself. I intend to do all the poems in this collection, so keep an eye out for the rest of them. You made it all the way to the end. Well done, thank you. Make use of your flashcards, and I look forward to the next poem.